Hello, everyone. Happy Friday Eve, and welcome to our webinar, What to Do When OSHA Appears. My name is Mitch Gapp. I'm an associate with McDonald Hopkins Business Litigation Department, and joining me today are my esteemed colleagues, Mike Latiff and Jeff Mattis. Mike is a partner at McDonald Hopkins and the co-chair of the Business Litigation Practice Group. He's been practicing law for over 26 years and has extensive experience as a trial attorney, handling high-profile automotive, commercial, business, and construction disputes, and has a subspecialty in counseling clients on OSHA matters and handling OSHA appeals nationally. Jeff is the CEO of 360 Safety. Jeff brings 3 decades of hands-on experience to the design and implementation of customized safety programs for the manufacturing, production, distribution, and service industries that meet or exceed OSHA and ISO standards. Today, our presentation is going to focus on 3 main topics: what you need to know when OSHA appears at your workplace, what you can do to be prepared, and what are some of the economic impacts to your business. We will also touch on the most recent COVID-related guidelines. And of course, we're always more than happy to answer any questions from the audience, and we encourage active participation throughout. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time simply by posting the question in the control panel. Without further ado, let's get started. Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Mitch, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Mike Latiff, and I'm a partner at McDonald Hopkins, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about OSHA today and what to do when they appear. So we'll start with that question. OSHA appearing at your place of business or your job site is not an if, it's a when. OSHA's charge, as you probably all know, is to keep employees safe. How they do that is through inspections of facilities and through other mechanisms to make sure that enforcement is being followed and that guidelines are being followed by companies who are employing individuals. So again, it's not an if, it's a when. And there's really 3 ways that OSHA will find their way to your doorstep. The 3 ways are: first, and the most prevalent, is a complaint. OSHA receives anonymous complaints from individuals. Those could be current employees, those could be former employees, those could be competitors in the marketplace. It's a variety of things, but the fact is you won't know who it is that has made a complaint. If they receive a complaint, they will either address it by reaching out to you through written communication, or depending on the nature of the complaint, simply showing up at your doorstep to do an investigation, hold an opening conference, and come into your facility and start investigating. The second way is if there's an accident that requires a reporting to OSHA. Requirements for OSHA reporting are: if there's a fatality, you need to be reported within 8 hours of the fatality occurring. If it's an injury that requires an inpatient hospitalization, an amputation, or an eye loss, it must be reported to them within 24 hours. So if one of those events happen, you can pretty much rest assured that they will be at your doorstep and they will begin an investigation. So the question is, are you prepared for that? Have you prepared in advance, and how can you prepare? We're going to address some of those questions today, as well as what your plan should have in it and how it should be processed and executed at the time when OSHA arrives. Next slide, please. Let's go back to slide number 3, please, or 4. Okay, being prepared for the inevitable visit from OSHA. What is the economic impact to your organization? Our colleague Jeff Mattis from 360 Safety is going to walk you through that and talk through some of the true economic impacts that can occur. What you need to know when they show up, and what OSHA will do, what the mechanisms they'll walk through. Again, we'll discuss those as we go through today. Next slide, please. Being prepared for the inevitable visit from OSHA. What should an employer do? Here's some suggestions on what an employer can and should do to take following precautions to limit citations and the severity of citations that can occur at the inspection. The first and most important thing is to have a plan and to designate who the individuals is or are that will be dealing with OSHA when they show up at your door. Typically, OSHA will show up and they'll show you their credentials. They're required to do that, identifying themselves as safety officers, and inspectors, and they'll have to tell you that they're going to hold an opening conference and an investigation. They usually, my suggestion and advice is to have a specific team member, whether that's your corporate safety officer or designated person or officer or manager within the company, who can handle that. If you're out on a job site, then the foreman is typically the most senior person that may be at the job site. They should be prepared and trained on what to do when OSHA shows up, pulls up in a truck, and starts an investigation. Whether that's, contact somebody from the organization right away. That's usually my first recommendation is to whoever that specific individual is that's charged with dealing with OSHA inspections, and to make sure that they're in the loop on what's being done. Make sure that you have available written material that we're required to have either in your organization or at the job site. I always suggest that if you have people out in the field, you should have your training manual, your employee handbook in the truck, available to at least the foreman who's running the job at all times, and just keep them in your truck, keep them in the work van, whatever it may be. If it's on your site, then obviously you should have that readily accessible and available. You want to have written training done and records kept for any training that occurs with your employees. The key to dealing with an OSHA investigation and to minimizing any types of citations or penalties is to make sure that you have a policy, that you document that policy, and that you enforce it. And while many companies do have policies, fewer actually keep documentation of the training and exercises they do, and even fewer actually enforce the policy as written. But it's important to do that. As an example, if you have an employee disciplinary policy that requires, a lot of companies have 3-strike type policies. First strike's a warning, second strike is a written up, and the third strike is dismissal. You can have any variation of that. Maybe it's 4 strikes, maybe it's something different. But keeping track and record that the first time there was at least a verbal discussion, that second time you keep a record of that written warning, and of course, third, that there was a dismissal, or if it's 4th, there's 2 written warnings, whatever the case may be. But it's important to have access to that. Similarly, it's important to retain documentation of any toolbox talks, sign-in sheets, any types of meetings or training that you do in-house or out-of-house. If you outsource it to a company like 360 Safety, for instance, who can maintain, do training, and keep records and help assist with your documentation and record keeping. You want to also establish a new hire orientation program that includes safety training of some sort. And again, have it documented, have the training documented, and have the fact that each new employee went through that training, signed off on it, and acknowledges it, that they received that training. And of course, you'll always want to have the required tools, equipment, PPE that is needed for any particular job that occurs, handy at the site and in use if applicable. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, if you come away from anything from this webinar, I would hope it would be that you realize the importance of enforcing the program that you have and documenting the fact that you are enforcing it for your employees. That is key and critical to any OSHA investigation that may occur. Anybody who's gone through a OSHA investigation knows that the inspectors often, almost always, request documentation of training, of what materials were provided, of what attendance each of the individual's employees in the particular area that they're looking at has done, and you will need to deliver those, and you'll need to deliver them in fairly short order to OSHA. Of course, the OSHA 300 log is something that's required to be kept and handy and available to them, and they'll want to take a look at that as well during the inspection. Again, there should be a contact list and a program for your plan. To establish a written emergency plan for dealing with accidents, is again important. You want to have the designated person I mentioned before, and keep your materials handy. If you work in multiple states, you'll want to understand and make sure you know what the applicable rules are for that particular state. OSHA can be either federally mandated and enforced in particular states, or states are free to also have their own program called state plan states. So about half the states in the country do their own program and enforce their own OSHA. In Michigan, where I'm located, my OSHA or Michigan OSHA has a state plan state charge, and they administer their program according to the federal regulations and are charged with being at least as effective as the federal program that exists. They can be more stringent, and in some areas they are, but for the most part, they follow federal OSHA standards and guidelines and enforcement. Other states, such as Ohio, is a federally enforced jurisdiction, and so the federal government employs and enforces OSHA guidelines through their safety inspectors. If there is nuances in the states that you work on or may work in that are state plan states, you'll want to know what those nuances are, understand them, and make sure you're complying with them. Again, as I mentioned previously, you'll want to also train any person on a job site who's the most senior person or maybe the most senior person to know what to do when OSHA appears. Next. Okay, next slide, please. We're going to talk about what should you do when an OSHA inspector arrives. The first and foremost thing is to make sure that they are who they say they are. They will show you their credentials. They're required to do that. They have a card that they're required to demonstrate and show you that they are an official OSHA inspector. You'll always want to be polite and succinct to them. They are the person that is ultimately going to do the inspection. Once they're there, you want to be as polite as you can be, but also not offer more information than they're asking for or is necessary. You want to be clear with them on any answers you give to questions, but be succinct. My advice is always invite them in, set them down in a separate room if they're at a manufacturing facility, and let them go through what's their opening conference, explain why they're there, have whoever is your designated person there with them. That person should accompany them throughout their investigation at all times. Should keep a note card with them or notepad to take notes as to everything the inspector's doing throughout the time they're in the inspection, and should also have with them a camera to take pictures of anything that the OSHA inspector may take pictures of. If they take a measurement, note it and do the same measurement later. Come back that same day and do the same measurement. Point being, you want to accompany them. I would suggest you ask questions and try and minimize the amount of answering any questions that you can. Again, be succinct and be clear, but don't offer unneeded or unasked for information. Once OSHA's in your facility, even if they have a complaint about one aspect or one particular machine or issue, once they're in your facility, they can go through the entire facility and inspect everything. So they have the right to do that. They have the right to speak with representatives of the employer. In other words, they can talk to your employees, and we're going to talk about in a few minutes here how to handle that, what rights you may have as an employer, and what rights an employee may have in terms of being interviewed and or obtaining a written statement. As long as they're not interfering with or substantially interfering with the job performance, they have the right to speak with employees. Go ahead, please. As I've mentioned, the employer representative should feel free to take notes and ask questions during the interview. Again, if the inspector starts writing something down, ask what they're writing in a polite manner. They may not answer you, but it's worth asking the questions, and then take notes on what their answers are. Make note of the time they spend in your facility from the start time to the finish time. That often can be important in terms of the how comprehensive that their inspection is later on down the line if a citation should result. In terms of interviews, this is an important feature or fact, and I found over the years that many employers don't understand who can be interviewed and what rights both the employer has and the employee has. First of all, if an OSHA inspector is going to interview a managerial level person, the company has a right to have somebody there in the room, whether it be an owner or an executive or a lawyer, with that individual who's a manager of the company. The reason for that is that manager or executive who's being interviewed can bind the company to admissions later on. If they make a statement, that's a statement made on behalf of the company. So as a result, a company has the right to have somebody there with any person at that level or higher. In terms of employees, while the company does not have the right to have the same access and have an employer representative there with the employee at the time of the interviews, by the company's direction, the employee has the right to decide whether or not they want somebody from the employer there with them. The employee can either choose to have the interview done on their own in private with the safety officer. They can choose to have an employer there with them or employer representative with them, or they can simply choose not to be interviewed. They have all those rights, and it's important that employees know that they have those rights in advance of OSHA showing up. Oftentimes, safety officers will make the statement that they have the right to talk to the employee individually and privately. And while that's true, there is the caveats I just indicated previously, that the employee has the right to stop and say, no, I'd like to have somebody with me, or I'm not going to give a statement at this time. Additionally, during interviews, it is common practice for OSHA inspectors to have employees write out statements, or the OSHA inspector will summarize what's being said and will write it out and have an employee sign and date that. Again, it's important to note that the employee also has the right to choose not to do a statement or write out a statement, or not to sign a statement. Once they do sign a statement, whether it's their writing or the OSHA inspector's writing, they're confirming what's in that statement. And that is what OSHA will base its citations on later on, and defense of any appeal of those citations. So it's important that every word that's stated, if they do choose to sign a statement, regardless of who prepared it, is accurate, is literally accurate in terms of every statement in being correct. And oftentimes that's not the case. Summaries or just kind of expressions of general thoughts can be used later on to, or can lead to context that isn't accurate or wasn't what was intended. So it's really important that those interview statements are accurate. I always suggest to employers to advise their employees, if they do take a statement or if they do give a statement, either take a picture of it with their phone or ask for a copy of it so that it can be shared with the employer later on, because OSHA does not have to share that interview statement with you until much later on down the process, whether there's an appeal ongoing and you have to request an unredacted version of a statement well down the road through an appeals process. So you may not ever see that statement, or if you do, it will be highly redacted at a time when it's useful and meaningful to you. So I always encourage employers to advise their employees, take a picture of it, get the statement, and at that point, they have a record of what was said. Next, please. We've been through this, so I won't repeat it, but carry a camera, take pictures. The records you keep are important to defending citations later on down the line. Next. At the end of the inspection, whether it's that day or a subsequent day, and it could be subsequent days or weeks later, a closing conference will be held. The inspector will come back and talk to you about what they found and what citations they're issuing. They won't tell you at that point because it's not been decided in the internal OSHA process what the penalty is or what the classification of fine is. And so it's important for you during a closing during a closing conference to ask questions about the designation of the citations or what the types of citations are. But it's important also to still be very polite. Anything you say will be written down by an OSHA inspector and included into the file. So it's important not to, when you're being cited, react to whatever the citation is. The time will come for that down the line, and you'll have ample opportunity. Next. Try and determine from the inspector at the time what classification there might be. They won't have a penalty decided in terms of the amount, but they may be recommending, although it won't be final, the type of classification, whether that's willful, which is the highest and worst classification, serious, which is a violation that suggests there's a high likelihood of injury or death that may result from whatever the violation may be, or an other than serious. There's also repeat designations. If you've had a serious before, they may give you a repeat serious, and we'll see in a minute here how those fines may shake out. If they give you, and they will typically for most citations, an abatement period, then you will need to make sure that you can rectify whatever the potential abatement is that's being claimed within the time period they've designated. If not, then extensions are available and you can get longer abatement periods. Again, your general attitude throughout the inspection will have an impact on the citations. It's important that you are pleasant and polite throughout, because it may impact how they deal with you, not only in the citation and penalty phase, but later on if you seek to appeal. Go ahead. They will send you a copy of their inspections. You have options. You can pay the fine and commence abatement, or petition for a modification of abatement, request an informal conference, or appeal the citation. Appealing the citation means you're contesting it or trying to contest it, and there will be a judicial process to fight that citation. Next. It is very important to know that you have to make a decision within 15 working days, not 15 literal days, but working days, Monday through Friday, to challenge that citation. It is very important to make a decision and do something within those 15 days. If you do not, then the citation becomes final and it's not appealable anymore. So it's important to, if you're going to appeal, send out an appeal letter, schedule an informal conference within those 15 days. The informal conference scheduling will not toll the time period in which you have to appeal. The appeal remains those 15 days, 15 working days. So if you have an informal conference within that time period, you'll still have to appeal if you cannot resolve it at that point. Next. Information and best practices. Next slide, please. Just quickly, I wanted to point out to you a few of the top 10 serious violations and the top 10 willful violations. These are for 2020, but I assure you that any given year, you're going to see a similar pattern with the same types of violations. Almost every year, fall protection remains at the highest. In addition, you'll always see on these lists scaffolding issues, machine guarding, lockout, tagout, and those are always at the highest levels. From the willful standpoint, those are the ones that you really need to focus on and make sure that you're paying attention and doing all the training and documentation you need to protect against those types of citations, if that is within the practice of your company in terms of what you do in terms of your company's performance. Next, please. Just quickly, with OSHA, in terms of the COVID response, just wanted to note quickly that OSHA has issued some guidelines. However, they have not issued any rules or regulations pursuant to COVID. The OSHA guidelines contained in a January 29, 2021 letter that can be found on the OSHA website talks about things that you would expect: controlling hazard assessment, identifying control measures to limit the virus, and adopting policies for employee absences in the midst of COVID. Next slide. Again, the most important part to take away is that these are guidance recommendations of OSHA, not standards or regulations that have been created, and there's no new legal obligations. Instead, the same obligations that existed under the regulations, OSHA has included them into their hazard communication program, regulations, and the like. So while there is no new guidance, new standards or regulations, it's important to know that OSHA is looking at the practices of companies related to COVID-19 in terms of their planning and their communication and their policies with regard to dealing with employee concerns. Next slide. Finally, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of what citations can look like. Back in November 2015, there was new penalties. Prior to this, penalties were lower, then instituted penalty amounts, at least the limits at which they can be cited. So for other than serious, they can be up to currently $13,653 for each violation. Same for serious. Willfuls, $136,532 is the current amount, the maximum penalty that a company can receive for one single willful violation. So these can add up quickly. And again, Jeff will address the economic impact. Repeat serious violations are also at the same level of willful violations in terms of the penalty. Next. So thank you. That's going to conclude my portion of the presentation.
Thank you, Mike. We did receive the following question. In a union shop, can an employee ask for a union representation during interviews?
The answer is yes. An employee can ask for representation of a union. They can ask a union representative. They can ask for employer. They have the right to determine who they would like to sit in the interview with them.
Thanks, Mike. As I mentioned at the outset, we'll now hand it over to Jeff Mattis, CEO of 360 Safety, for his in-depth insight into OSHA inspections and the potential economic impacts to your business. Jeff?
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Mike, nice job from a legal perspective. I'd say probably, our mantra is be audit ready. So I think the most important thing, and I'm going to give you some more practical application to OSHA showing up at businesses, is to practice with your staff, a mock OSHA audit when they come in. Have your documents prepared, have your documents ready. But Mike mentioned this in the beginning, or during his presentation, but it's really important when those inspectors come on site that you get them in another room or in the lobby and you do verify their credentials. You do find out why they're there, and then you only address the specific things that they're there to see. We don't want them walking all over our facilities if they're just there to inspect a fork truck accident. We want to take them to the fork truck accident, and that's it. So just practice having them come in to your facility, and so you're prepared for that. I do have a document. It's called OSHA Inspector Visitor Procedures. I'm happy to share it with anybody. We give them to our clients, but it pretty much outlines what you have to do when they show up, where your documents are located, so you're not struggling or searching for anything. So I think it's really important. I think that during that opening conference, if you're organized, you're prepared, you have the documentation, it really sets the tone for that visit. Sometimes they come in with attitudes, or they're younger people, so if you can take the time and show them your level of preparation before the inspection even gets started, it will go a long way towards minimizing any fines that they decide or citations to impose upon your company. But it's really important to set the tone, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. Next slide, please. So when they show up at your office, your business, they're looking for your required policies and procedures. They want to make sure they're current, that you're updating them and reviewing them every year. As far as workplace hazards and mitigation, they want to make sure you're identifying hazards, you're mitigating those hazards, closing them out. They want to make sure you have the required postings, your OSHA logs, your record keeping, everything's current and up to date. Training is important to them. They're going to ask for training records. You're going to have to produce those. Sometimes they'll let you send them later, but if you have them on hand in your current binder, then you're good to go. They'll be really pleased to see that. They want to know the level of your employees' involvement in the safety program, so there will be discussions around that, but the bottom line is they're initially assessing your ability to run a safe business and so that your employees aren't subject to being injured. Next slide. Mike talked about all the different aspects of the OSHA inspections, the opening conference, facility wall-to-wall, or specific things that they might address in the closing conference. I think it's important to be prepared in all these different aspects, not just receiving them, but making sure that you're ready to take them through the facility and do all the things that Michael mentioned. So it's really important to practice in all three aspects of the OSHA inspections. Next. These are really just some tips and things that we've seen. When the OSHA compliance officers come on site, I mean, you want to greet them with warm arms and let them know you want to work with them and take them through the facility. If you keep them waiting, they think you're not ready. Or if you're hiding something, it's different. You're blocking their eyes of sight. They think you're hiding something. So, have your documents prepared. Don't discourage employees from talking to them. Don't lie to them. They're going to ask you questions sometimes and even try to trick you. You got to make sure that you're on task and telling them the truth about things, good or bad, when they're out there. And they're looking for hazards and not just standards. So you have to be aware of that too. And then again, Mike talked about this, but make sure you have a designated person that can take them through this process, kind of your quarterback for the whole process. We like to get involved with our clients, so when OSHA does come on site, we ask them to give us a call, and we'll try to get somebody there right away to assist with the audit. Next, please. I was on site with one of my clients, and happened to be in the plant, and a federal OSHA inspector showed up. So they called me and the safety director, and we went up to the front office and we sat down, and they started telling us why we were there, and we were asking all the questions and doing all the right things. And then we asked if we could just take a minute to show them our safety program and the things that we were doing and the reasons why safety was important to our company. So we prepared a binder for them, which is what you should do. And we went through with them. We said, and these are some of the items that are in the binder. Here's our safety committee roster, and here are the roles and responsibilities for each person that sits on that committee. Here's our accident investigation reports with our root cause analysis and corrective actions. And they want to see that you've taken those corrective actions and closed them out. Same with near miss reports. They want to see that you're auditing your facility for hazards. And then when you do identify hazards, you establish some sort of problem countermeasure sheet where you're mitigating those hazards and closing them out and getting them, closed. They want to make sure you're doing PPE assessments, that you're assessing your personal protective equipment, and that you're doing it annually and you're enforcing it. They don't want you to say everybody's supposed to be wearing safety glasses, but they walk out in the facility and nobody's wearing them and you're not enforcing them. And then they want to make sure you have an employee communication process. So that's your toolbox talks, things like that you're doing. And you should have sign-in sheets for your toolbox talks. You can say we're having them, but if you don't have a sign-in sheet and proof of it, you didn't do it. So everything that they want to see has to be documented in writing. If you can't provide things in writing with sign-off sheets and things of that nature, then they'll tell you you're not doing it. And you may be doing it, but writing means everything to them during their inspections. Next slide. So Michael talked about interviewing people. From our experience, we've been on the floor. They can interview and will interview up to 10% of your your hourly staff or your plant staff or your direct labor workers. They're going to want to know how many locations by state, are you union or non-union, number of years in business, hours of operation. And they're asking a lot of this information because if things are going really well and you're displaying a well-run and organized safety program where you're at, they may not go to the other locations. But in turn, if you are not doing that, they may visit every one of your other locations. So they're going to ask these questions and you should have the answers for them. Next slide. So these are typical copies of written documents. So we went through the binder with the accident investigation reports and all that information, but then we also have their programs, policies, and procedures all in a binder as well, printed out, ready for them to review. These have to be reviewed and updated annually, but when we open it up, they're going to be asking for your OSHA logs. Here's our OSHA logs. Here's a document that explains our health and safety program. Here's our lockout tagout procedure, our electrical safety program, and so on. And the programs aren't limited to this because every business has got different programs that are going to be applicable. But when you can show them the programs, the program documents, and the revision dates, that really goes along the tone for them, really understanding that, hey, we're doing the things that we're supposed to be doing to run an effective safety program, and we care about our employees. So it's really important to keep these things up to date. Next slide. There's really two types of walkthrough, comprehensive or a wall-to-wall inspection. We don't really see those as much. We see a lot of specific focus inspections, fork truck inspection, and an amputation, something along that line. So when we bring them in, that's what's important about the initial interviews, is finding out why they want to be here and then just sticking to the point on that subject matter. So we'll take them to where the injury was, what happened, show them the accident investigation report, show them the corrective action, show them pictures of the event. But we don't want to take them anywhere else. They generally don't want to go anywhere else anyway. So take them to where the problem was. If you've done your job and you've created the proper documentation, that should go really well. But when they're in there and they're doing a wall-to-wall focus, they usually have equipment focus. So they're looking at your machine guarding functionality, operator functionality demonstrations, so your people know how to operate the guards, the light curtains, things of that nature. Fork truck inspections. I've been in plants when they've inspected them, and they literally pulled every fork truck operator off their machine, made them go through their daily inspection sheet, had them show them how they checked the fork truck to make sure it's in good condition, and then show them their current license. So, I mean, every fork truck. So it's important that you keep and maintain that information. Making sure they're wearing their PPE, and if you have cranes, and again, it's not limited to just these items, but these are some of the hot points I think that they're looking for. Next slide. We talked a little bit about employee interviews. So when they're interviewing your employees, these are the things they're usually focusing on when they get into your facility. They want to know that you have lockout and tagout procedures, and they want to know that they know who's responsible, who's affected, who's authorized, how the guards work, how they operate the safety devices. Do they know how to turn them on? Do they know how to turn them off? Are they allowed to lock the equipment out or not? They want to know all that information. You know, do they have the authority to guard from a machine? They're asking those types of questions. Again, job-specific training too. Are you being trained? Do you have effective training? They want to know those answers to those questions. Again, fork truck functionality and inspections. They're looking at loading docks. They're looking at trailers. They're making sure the trailers are chalked. Loading dock safety. So whether it's barriers or safeties or chains, usually when they go through the facilities, these are the things that we've seen them focus on in those facilities. Next, please. These are typically some of the questions that they ask your employees. They don't really want the management or us to be with them when they're asking employee questions. So when it is okay for them to ask an employee a question, I just happened to be hanging around a little bit and probably standing too close, so they were asking the questions. But this is what they want to know: does management respond promptly to safety concerns? So if the employees bring something up, are you addressing it? Are you fixing their problem, or are you writing it down and throwing it away and never going back and addressing it? They want to know that, hey, when somebody tells us something, we actually respond to it. We actually correct the problem, fix the problem. So they're looking to see that employees have a voice in safety, and these are some of the questions that they're going to ask those employees. Okay, next. I think I have an example of this client that I was at. When we got to we actually had a closing conference on site. They inspected our facility. They did find 2 press brakes. One had non-operational light curtains. The other one had no light curtains on them. Those would have been citable, but we had done such a good job with presentation and preparation of our documents that they really had no questions as far as knowing that we were running an effective safety program. I mean, we were doing all the things we were supposed to do. We had all the documentation in place. We had all our records in order. We were prepared. We let them right in. The inspector actually said to us, look, you guys should apply for the voluntary protection plan. You're doing absolutely everything you should be doing to run an effective safety program. And she said, the only thing is that, you have these 2 situations with the guards, but because you're doing such a good job, we're not going to cite you for those. We just want you to fix them and send me some pictures that they've been taken care of. So my point is that if we weren't prepared and we didn't have the documents and we were rude to the inspector, this may have ended up with some serious citations, but it didn't. So again, as long as you're prepared and welcoming to them and take them through and make it a pleasant experience, and they see all the documentation, the visits go really well in our experience. Okay, next. So just real quick, we put in safety programs throughout the country and multiple location operations. Nice thing is that we can standardize those programs throughout the country, so everybody's doing the same thing, maintaining all the same documentation. So we call that complete OHSMS, which is Occupational Health and Safety Management System. So it's really A to Z, all the nuts and bolts, everything from structuring your safety programs, to your safety committees, to your training, to your policies and procedures, to all your documentation, to your training, to new hire programs like Mike mentioned. It's we have a web-based product where we actually provide all the OSHA requireds on a safety training platform, but if you have specific training, crane training, fork truck training, things like that, we can do that as well to help you out. But we really have a lot of great experience implementing occupational health and safety, we call it management systems. Okay, next slide. So I was talking to Mike and Mitch and their team members, and I said I wanted to put something into my presentation that spoke to measuring the financial impact of, how does safety really impact dollars and cents in my operation. So I have a workers' compensation background, so I'm going to just take you through something. If you don't understand it, you're welcome to shoot me an email and I can take you through it again. But essentially, on everybody's workers' compensation policy, you have an experience mod. It's a factor that either increases or decreases your premium based on your losses. In this case, this company did not have a good experience. Their experience mod was 117, so that's a 17% debit off their base premiums. We have a program we can enter your data in, and it determines your minimum experience mod. In this case, for this company, their minimum experience mod was 59. So their mod was almost double what it should be. So when we did the calculation in our program, they were paying about $112,000 more than they should have been paying for their workers' compensation. So then in the last year, they had $59,000 in injuries, and we would anticipate that indirect costs on those injuries are 4 to 10 times claim costs. So we use 4 on the low side, so we multiply that number times 4, and it's $135,000. If we add those two numbers together, that gives us $347,000 at a 5% profit margin. You've got to produce almost $7 million in product to pay for those injuries. So, putting in a safety program that's OSHA compliant really helps start to reduce your injuries and improve your shareholder value. So we took that a step further and we said, hey, if we don't have that $347,000, we can't invest that back in our company. So we lose a potential 20% return on our investment, which is another $69,000. And if we add those numbers together, it's $400 and some $1,000, but at a 5% profit margin, the numbers now you got to produce $8.3 million in sales to pay for those injuries. And if you look at your shareholder value, you take the 417 times an EBITDA of 6, $2.5 million impact to your shareholder value. So I think it's important that you look at these numbers and understand that if you do put in a program, you can really reduce your workers' compensation costs and improve the shareholder value of your firm. And next. This is where we make huge impacts with our clients on injuries. So I'm going to take you through this injury real quick. So roughly in this injury, the indemnity amount, that's the wage loss amount, was $2,000. Roughly the medical was $4,000 and the claim total $6,000. So we took that claim and submitted it to the insurance company, and at the end of a 3-year period, that claim ended up costing us $21,000 in additional premiums to our workers' compensation policy just for this one claim. So we help our clients do cost-benefit analysis on every claim and go through this exercise, especially, well, really just for lost time when we think there's going to be a potential lost time claim. But we said, hey, let's return this person to work, and even if we have to pay them and they have to count paper clips, when we submit this claim as medical only, it gets discounted 70% as it applies to your mod. So now what happens is that claim only costs you $4,500 over a 3-year period. So there's substantial savings there. And if you fall down to the bottom and you look at it, if we just took the $2,000 in wages and added it to the $4,500 but subtracted it from the $21,000, we end up saving $14,000 over a 3-year period. So it really is a way to save dollars long term on your workers' compensation and drive your experience mod down, which runs back to that shareholder value and really helps improve the lowering the premiums and your shareholder value. So I wanted to share that with everybody. And again, if you have questions about it, I'm happy to respond to them and answer them.
Thanks, Jeff. We did receive the following questions, and I think we'll go back to Mike for this one. But following question: can an employee have the employer review statements prior to providing to the inspector?
So the short answer to that is yes, they can seek to do that. I guess the longer answer to that is a safety officer is not going to probably agree or readily agree to letting them go show their statement to an employer and then sign it and come back. And so it could be a cause for some contention within the inspection. I think the bigger point to let your employees know is if you're not comfortable with what's in the document, the interview statement, whether he wrote it or whether she wrote it or whether the inspector wrote it, then they shouldn't sign it. And it really should be that simple. They need, if they're going to go down the interview, the written statement path, then they have to be absolutely certain that everything in it is accurate and true. So they can certainly ask to have an employer review it. I think the safety inspector will resist that, but it's their right to choose to whether they're going to sign it or not sign it.
Okay, here's another question. If OSHA shows up for a random audit and not an official investigation, what should we know about the difference in these two types of visits?
I can address that one. So I started out my presentation by saying there was 3 manners in which OSHA could show up. I think it only went through 2, which were a complaint or an accident. The third one is a random audit. So I will tell you, first of all, in my experience, over the last many years, there has been very few random appearances in audits, simply because staffing levels within the government for safety officers has just not been at a level where they have time to do random audits. Their days are consumed with complaints principally, and then accidents. So, but in terms of how you approach it, if it is a random audit, you don't approach anything differently. You try and, as Jeff said, bring them into a room, sit them down, find out what they're there to do, what they want to see, and take them on, limit them as much as you can. If you can, certainly they have a right to go through the whole facility or job site, but you do what you can to politely keep it to the minimum.
Yeah, I agree.
Both of you guys.
100%.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree 100%. This client I was speaking of, there was no complaint, there was no injury. They were on a national emphasis program on amputation. So they were literally in one geographical area going into every business that had machinery or equipment that could create an amputation. So we treated it the same way, and I think that's great advice.
And for both of you, who can and should attend the closing conference?
Jeff, you want to start with this one?
Sure. Your management team should be there, your safety director, usually your director of HR, anybody that's been involved in the incident. But I do recommend you have your manager, they can be there.
Yeah, and I'd agree. I would say at a minimum have 2 people present. So whoever the designated person there is that was through the entire inspection with the OSHA officer side by side should definitely be there, and at least one other management person, just to avoid an issue of if there is something that comes out of it later on down the line of a he said, she said type of issue that could arise.
And and to that point about the closing conference, and Mike, you mentioned this during your part of the presentation, but it is critical that you do take pictures, you do take notes, so when they say something, you have something that you can reference regarding what their finding may have been. So you do want to mirror exactly what they're doing when they go through the facility.
And Jeff, can you expand on the employee communication plan and kind of that point person, maybe some advice for that quarterback?
Yeah, I mentioned I have a document. It's called OSHA Inspector Visitor Procedures, and really there's probably 10 or 15 items on it, but I'm happy to forward that to anybody. But it really lays out this is exactly what we should do and not do. So do, don't do, don't do. So there's a bunch of items on that. I'm happy to forward that to whoever wants to use it or see it.
Excellent. And lastly, for both of you guys, if a company is cited and the company challenges the citation, is there a concern that OSHA can quote unquote target the company?
So I'll address that. In my experience, if it's one citation, if it's one visit and there's citations from that visit, typically they're not going to target you. The only caveats to that would be this. One, if it's a willful violation, then you're on their radar and you will stay on their radar. And they will have subsequent visits, likely within the next 3 years, but certainly within the next 5 years. If it's a repeated instance where they've been to your facility multiple times in a 3 to 3 year window, then you'll be on their radar as well. And you can expect that they'll keep coming out to inspect your job sites or your facility until they've satisfied themselves that things have been rectified. So I wouldn't say the case in the instance of just one inspection and citation, but if it's multiple or if it's so severe that you're receiving willfuls, then that would be a game changer.
Agree.
Okay, that looks like all the questions we have at this time. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you all for attending today and taking such thorough notes. We hope you're able to come away with some valuable insight and maybe not have all the answers, but at least have the confidence to ask the right questions. So we're going to be following up with a link to access this presentation. I know Jeff has some materials he'd like to send out, and we'll also be sending a follow-up survey. So please be on the lookout for those. As always, we'll continue to follow and report on the latest developments, but don't hesitate to reach out in the meantime. Until then, take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.